Arben Leka, Ilira Vokshi, and Dritan Morina moved through London like shadows, building a criminal empire so silent and powerful that no one noticed until it was too late. Arben Leka reached London on a cold morning, blending into the crowds at Heathrow like a man with no past and no future. His suitcase was light, containing only clothes, a cheap phone, and a small notebook filled with coded symbols that only he could understand. He walked with calm confidence, not rushing, not hesitating. Nothing about him drew attention, which was exactly what his organization in America wanted. His mission was simple: study the United Kingdom quietly and prepare a foundation for an empire that could operate beneath the radar. Arben knew that the Albanian network in the U.S. trusted him because he never made mistakes, never left traces, and never asked unnecessary questions. He began his stay in a cramped room above a bakery in Southall, a place full of noise and movement where no one cared who you were. Every morning he observed the local community, the movement of delivery vans, and the rhythm of the streets. Arben stayed alert to every detail, taking notes in his coded language. He spent afternoons traveling to other parts of London, Barking, Camden, Tottenham, Stratford, always watching, never interacting. He evaluated how drugs entered neighborhoods, how stolen goods moved from one gang to another, and how the police reacted to sudden activity. He noticed patterns, such as when certain shops opened later than others, or when a group of men always stood near the same corner without speaking. These patterns helped him map the invisible lines of control within the city. Arben rarely slept in the same place for more than 2 nights. He rotated between cheap hostels and rental rooms to avoid being tracked, even though no one in the UK knew he existed. He avoided luxury, stayed away from nightlife, and used cash to prevent digital footprints. His silence kept him safe. His caution kept him alive. He ate simple meals and studied people with the focus of a hunter analyzing new territory. He observed how the British authorities monitored migrants, how security cameras covered nearly every major street, and how gangs adapted by using quiet, nonviolent movements rather than open fights. After a few weeks, Arben visited Tilbury and Dover, 2 of Britain's busiest ports. He remembered advice from his American handler: ports tell the real story of a country. Standing silently near the docks, he watched containers being loaded and unloaded by workers who followed the same routines every day. He noticed how certain shipments were checked thoroughly, while others were rushed through. He watched which supervisors arrived early and which left early. Every detail mattered because every detail could later be used. At night, Arben wrote reports in his notebook and then memorized every line before burning the page. He was building a picture of a country filled with opportunities for illegal trade. The UK had strong security, but also weak points: overworked port staff, overcrowded streets, hidden alley networks, and criminal groups too focused on fighting each other to notice a new player quietly entering. Arben knew that once his American bosses received his message, the real operation would begin. 1 month later, inside a dim room with no windows, he assembled his cheap phone, inserted a prepaid SIM card, and sent a short coded message across the Atlantic. The message simply meant one thing: the UK was ready to be entered. It was the start of a silent expansion, and nobody in Britain even imagined that a new empire had just placed its first stone in their country. Arben Leka began forming his inner circle with careful precision, selecting people who lived quietly, worked ordinary jobs, and had no connection to criminal records. His first choice was Dritan Morina, a calm and disciplined driver who spent his days transporting parcels for a courier service. Dritan possessed a strange talent. He remembered every road, alley, and shortcut in East London, even the ones blocked or under construction. Arben saw value in men who understood the city like a map printed in their minds. Dritan didn't ask questions when Arben approached him with an offer disguised as part-time delivery work. The money was good, the instructions simple, and the risk seemed invisible. The second person to join the network was Ilira Vokshi, a former bank employee fired for challenging her manager's unethical practices. She was intelligent, precise, and experienced in navigating financial systems. Arben knew she carried anger inside her. People with hidden resentment were easy to anchor into secret operations because they wanted to feel control again. Ilira's role was simple: create pathways through which money could travel without leaving fingerprints. Using old contacts and gaps she knew within banking procedures, she learned to move funds through ghost companies spread across Europe. Arben never explained the full plan to her, but she understood enough to remain loyal for now. The third was Besmir Kola, a quiet mechanic working in a small garage in Canning Town. Besmir was the type of man who lived in the background of society, unnoticed and unimportant to most, yet gifted with his hands. He modified cars with secret storage spaces so precise that even trained police dogs often missed them. Arben admired people who had no need for recognition. Besmir lived for his craft, and the extra cash Arben offered allowed him to support his aging parents. That alone kept him committed. Within 2 months, the trio transformed into a carefully balanced network. Dritan handled movements across the city, driving unmarked vans that blended into traffic. He memorized delivery patterns and made sure the group's vehicles never took the same route twice. He became Arben's shadow on the road, silent but dependable. Ilira ensured money flowed like clear water clean on the surface, dirty underneath. She operated from a small rented office disguised as a consultancy firm, where she worked late nights surrounded by spreadsheets, transaction windows, and burner laptops. Besmir modified vans, small cars, and even motorcycles, creating compartments hidden behind panels, under seats, or inside dashboards. Each vehicle was a puzzle only he could solve. Arben kept them separate at first, allowing each member to focus on their role without understanding the full picture. He believed knowledge was power, and limited knowledge meant limited threat. He trusted them individually, but never collectively. He also tested their loyalty, quietly dropping small pieces of false information to see if any of it leaked. Nothing did. The group remained tight. Their operations started with small tasks: transporting stolen electronics, moving packages between warehouses, and shifting unregistered phones across neighborhoods. These early jobs helped Arben measure their reactions. He noticed Ilira's calmness even when large sums moved under her supervision. Dritan never panicked during police checkpoints, and Besmir's modifications passed every random inspection. Soon, Arben connected the three of them without warning. He invited them to an empty warehouse at midnight, a place he had scouted weeks earlier. There, he revealed a larger operation smuggling high-value items into London through secret channels and sending profits back to the U.S. Through this combined system, Arben's network evolved from scattered tasks into a coordinating machine. No one suspected a thing. The Albanian network's early operations were invisible because they did not challenge existing gangs. Instead, they slipped quietly into the city's blind spots. And as London slept, Arben's shadow network grew stronger, threading itself through the city's veins like something alive, silent, and waiting to strike. Tilbury Port carried the smell of seawater, metal, and restless movement. Every day thousands of containers arrived from Europe, Asia, and the Americas, each holding goods that fueled the country's economy. Hidden among these shipments were weaknesses, gaps in inspections, tired workers, and predictable routines. Arben Leka spent weeks observing everything from a distance, watching how trucks lined up, how containers were chosen for inspection, and how supervisors walked their rounds. He knew ports were the heart of any criminal empire, and if he took control of even a small corner, he could open a doorway wide enough for an entire network to pass through. One of the dockworkers caught his attention. Callum Reeves, a thin man in his late 30s who moved slowly, always checking his phone, constantly looking exhausted. Arben noticed how Callum lingered after shifts, counting small bills before heading home. His uniform was worn, his shoes scratched, and his face carried the stress of someone buried under debt. Arben watched him for 3 weeks straight, memorizing his schedule, habits, and vulnerabilities. He learned Callum's wife worked 2 jobs, their rent was overdue, and their teenage son had recently left school. Desperation made people predictable. Arben approached Callum quietly, offering a harmless favor at first. Simply ignore 1 container during the evening shift. No explanation, no details. Just turn away for a few minutes. The payment was more than Callum earned in 2 weeks. That single act changed everything. Callum convinced himself it was nothing, just a small mistake, maybe a favor for someone harmless. But Arben understood human psychology. Once a man crossed the line, returning became almost impossible. The first shipment was small, electronics that had been reported damaged or lost. Callum let the container pass without raising a flag. Nothing happened that night. No alarms, no police. Callum slept better than he expected. A week later, Arben returned with a second request. This time the payment was larger. Callum hesitated for a moment, but the image of overdue bills overcame his fear. He agreed. Arben gradually increased the size and value of the shipments. Stolen luxury goods, unregistered phones, specialized tools items that blended easily into the market. The containers moved smoothly through Tilbury without anyone questioning them. Callum's role remained simple. Place a green mark on a list instead of a yellow one, or direct an inspector's attention to another container at just the right moment. The system was so busy and chaotic that his small actions slipped through unnoticed. Arben ensured that nothing suspicious stood out. He avoided patterns, altered schedules, and spread shipments across different days. He paid Callum in cash through indirect methods, envelopes hidden in toolboxes, or money tucked under loose floor panels near the docks. Callum never met the rest of the team, and never saw Arben's face clearly after the first meeting. The distance kept him loyal and terrified. When Arben was confident the port was fully within his influence, he expanded the operation. Bessemer modified vans to collect cargo at night, disguising them as regular delivery vehicles. Dritan navigated routes that bypassed major checkpoints. Ilira processed the profits through cleaning channels that made illegal goods appear legitimate. Slowly, the shipments increased in volume and value. What started as a few stolen items grew into a full-scale smuggling pipeline linking Europe, the UK, and the United States. By the end of the year, Tilbury Port had become the silent doorway for Arben's empire. No violence, no scenes, no alarms. Just a quiet, invisible system where goods entered the UK under the noses of authorities. Callum Reeves never understood how large the operation had become. He only knew that he couldn't quit. He was trapped, tied to a criminal machine far bigger than anything he had imagined. And while London slept, a new foundation of power had already locked itself into place, hidden behind containers, forgotten paperwork, and the quiet fear of one struggling dockworker. Arben's network had become a moving organism, quiet, disciplined, and invisible. But as his operations grew stronger, London's criminal landscape began to shift in ways nobody could fully understand. For decades, the city's underworld had been controlled by scattered groups, local gangs, small Eastern European circles, and a few family-run operations. They were loud, territorial, and often reckless. Arben's method was the opposite. He did not start wars, did not intimidate openly, and did not draw attention. Instead, he seeped into the cracks left by others, taking control without a single public confrontation. By 2014, profits from the Tilbury shipments were increasing every month. Goods came in, money went out, and Arben's silent network expanded into industries that never imagined themselves connected to organized crime. Construction companies struggling with cash flow accepted quiet partnerships. Nightclubs with declining attendance agreed to management help. Small repair shops, import businesses, and even food markets unknowingly became part of a larger chain that fed money through Ilira's hands and back to the U.S. leadership. Each company looked legitimate on the surface. Their paperwork was clean, their taxes paid. No one suspected they were part of something far bigger. Arben controlled everything from the shadows. He rarely appeared at any business, visited no clubs, and held no public meetings. Instead, he used intermediaries, ordinary employees, who believed they were working on simple contracts or temporary deals. Every piece of the puzzle was placed carefully, making Arben's empire look like a series of unrelated, harmless companies. Behind each one, however, sat an invisible thread that pulled money steadily toward him. While London gangs were busy fighting over territory and settling personal rivalries, Arben avoided them completely. He didn't want alliances or conflicts. He wanted silence. The local groups noticed the change in the flow of goods, but couldn't trace it. They felt something was happening in the background, shipments shifting, prices changing, routes becoming unpredictable. Something big, something organized, something they didn't understand, but they never found a target to blame. Arben's presence remained a rumor, never confirmed. Police activity increased as authorities sensed unusual movement in the city. Surveillance teams picked up traffic patterns that didn't make sense. Officers noticed that high-value goods were disappearing from the docks far less often, not because crime had stopped, but because the thefts had become invisible. The stolen items moved so smoothly into the market that they appeared legitimate. This confusion left investigators chasing shadows. Reports piled up with no direct leads, no known suspects, and no single group to focus on. The city was changing, but the reasons remained hidden. Arben, however, knew that the real danger wasn't the police or the local gangs. The biggest threat came from inside his own growing network. Expansion meant more people, more money, and more responsibility. Loyalty had to be managed carefully. Arben understood that power could create ambition. He watched his team closely, testing them without revealing his concerns. Besmir remained focused on his mechanical work, uninterested in power. Dritan stayed loyal, his life simple and structured. But Ilira, with her increasing control over the financial channels, grew more aware of how much money passed through her hands. Arben noticed her subtle curiosity about transactions she wasn't meant to understand. Still, he continued building his empire. He tightened his grip on London quietly, earning influence rather than forcing it. Businesses paid him without knowing they paid him. Goods moved without anyone learning who authorized them. And the underworld, once driven by noise and violence, slowly began revolving around a man who didn't even appear on the police radar. Arben had become the quiet force behind London's most profitable criminal machine. But beneath the calm surface, cracks were forming, cracks that would soon shatter the balance he had worked so hard to build. Ilira Vokshi had always been careful with her work, but one late evening inside her small office in Shoreditch, she noticed something unusual: numbers that did not match the transfers she had processed. A separate stream of money appeared across accounts she had never been instructed to use. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the system, or an accidental duplication. But the amounts were too clean, too structured, too deliberately hidden. She spent the next 3 nights analyzing the irregular entries. Every transaction formed a pattern, a secret route for funds that bypassed both her oversight and the system she had created. Ilira finally understood that Arben had been funneling millions without telling his own network. He had created a parallel channel built entirely outside her view. This meant only one thing: he was preparing his exit. Arben wasn't just building an empire, he was building a personal escape route. Ilira realized the severity of her discovery. If Arben planned to leave, he could easily choose to erase his team to protect the secret. And Ilira, who handled every major financial movement, would be the first liability he needed to eliminate. She tried to hide her reaction from Arben during their next meeting. He watched her closely, his face unreadable. He never raised his voice, never hinted at suspicion. Yet Ilira sensed that he had already begun observing her. His calmness made her even more afraid. She spent hours imagining how someone like Arben removed problems, cleanly, quietly, without traces. People vanished in the world he controlled. She refused to become another silent disappearance. In her panic and fear, Ilira made a desperate choice. She contacted a rival Eastern European group that had begun rising in South London. They were known for aggression, unlike Arben's subtlety, but they had one advantage. They wanted power quickly and were willing to attack the right target to get it. Ilira encrypted a message and sent it through a burner device, offering them valuable information: Arben's safe house location, his hidden financial channels, and the schedule he followed every week. In exchange, she demanded protection and a new identity. The rival group wasted no time. They had been trying to understand who controlled the shifting underworld movements in London, and now Ilira had handed them the answer. She didn't stop to consider the consequences of what she had done. Her fear of Arben overshadowed any loyalty she had felt toward the network. She believed the rival group would remove him efficiently, and she could start a new life far from the silent empire she had helped build. Ilira cleaned her office, deleted every file from her laptops, and destroyed multiple SIM cards. But the weight in her chest refused to disappear. She knew Arben's organization had eyes everywhere, even in places she couldn't imagine. Every step she took felt monitored. She avoided routine, changed her accommodation, and packed only a small suitcase for quick escape. Meanwhile, Arben sensed a shift. His instincts sharpened from years of survival. He felt an invisible tension in the network, as if something unstable had begun forming beneath the surface. Dritan mentioned nothing unusual in his routes. Besmir continued his work without noticing any change. But Ilira, her behavior had become different: subtle hesitation, shorter conversations, late-night office activity. Arben didn't accuse her. He simply increased his caution. He changed safe houses, altered schedules, and silently prepared for betrayal. But Ilira believed she had acted first. She believed she had the advantage. What she did not know was that Arben had survived much greater threats. The night she delivered his location to the rival group, she unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the entire criminal landscape of London and seal her own fate. The storm rolled over North Greenwich like a warning, thick clouds swallowing the moonlight as icy rain hammered rooftops and empty streets. Arben Leka had been staying in one of his temporary safe houses, a small apartment hidden above a closed textile shop. He chose it because it had two exits, one through the back alley and another through a narrow staircase leading to a locked basement. He trusted no location for more than a few nights, but tonight he had felt uneasy since sunset. Something in the air carried tension, a disturbance that made his instincts sharpen. Years of surviving in dangerous environments had taught him to listen to that quiet internal alarm. He sat at a small wooden table reviewing coded notes when he heard the first sign, the faintest vibration on the metal staircase outside. Not footsteps, pressure, movement, someone trying to distribute their weight quietly. Arben didn't panic. He stood up slowly, grabbed his coat, and moved toward the back exit. His escape routes were always prepared ahead of time. One led through a cramped corridor, hidden behind a false wall. The other required crawling through a narrow vent that opened into an alley behind the building. He had rehearsed both paths in complete darkness. Meanwhile, 4 members of the rival Eastern European group approached the safe house from 2 directions. They carried suppressed weapons and wore dark jackets. Ilira's information had been precise. They believed Arben would be asleep by this hour. They expected a quick strike, a silent takedown, and a clean extraction of documents that would expose his entire network. But Arben was awake, alert, and already moving. When the first intruder pushed the door open, the apartment appeared empty. A chair was still warm. Papers lay scattered across the table. A lamp flickered. But Arben was gone. The intruders spread out quickly, searching every room. One moved toward the closet, another toward the window, two more toward the back corridor. Their movements were sharp and mechanical, trained to kill efficiently. But they were playing in Arben's territory, a place he had mapped and memorized down to every crack in the wall. As they entered the narrow hallway, Arben was already descending the basement stairs, silent and controlled. He didn't run. Running made noise. Running attracted attention. Instead, he moved like he was slipping between shadows. Once he reached the basement, he pushed open a grated door that led into an old service tunnel. He had discovered it weeks earlier, hidden behind broken boxes. Most people didn't even know such tunnels existed beneath London's older industrial buildings. Arben followed the path calmly, listening for distant echoes. Back upstairs, chaos grew. One attacker found the false wall, but too late. The corridor behind it was empty. Another shouted a warning when he noticed the vent had recently been opened. The rival group realized Arben had escaped only seconds before they arrived. Their frustration turned into rage. They searched frantically, overturning furniture and ripping open floorboards. But Arben had already slipped into the underground darkness. Outside, Dritan Morina unknowingly drove past the area on his usual route. He didn't realize he was only streets away from a violent clash. Besmir, recovering at home from a minor injury, slept without knowing danger was unfolding. The only person truly aware of what was happening was Ilira, anxiously waiting for a message confirming Arben's elimination. She didn't receive one. Time passed. Minutes stretched. Silence grew louder. Arben emerged from the tunnel entrance 15 minutes later, soaked from the rain but unshaken. He crossed a parking lot, blended into the shadows, and vanished into the night. His years of preparation had saved him, but he also understood something else. Ilira had betrayed him. He didn't need proof. Her actions had left a trace, a shift in the rhythm of the network that only he could feel. The next morning, police found the safe house torn apart. The rivals had fled after failing their mission. For authorities, it became another confusing crime scene with no suspects and no clear motive. But for Arben, the message was clear. His silence had been broken. Someone within his circle had opened the door to his enemies. And now, the calm empire he had built would begin to unravel, starting from the inside. Alex crouched behind the rusted metal dumpster, chest heaving as the cold night air scraped through his lungs. The alley was silent except for the distant echo of sirens. Too many sirens, all closing in. His palms were still wet with sweat and someone else's blood, and he couldn't tell which terrified him more. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not tonight. Not after all the careful planning. One wrong move and everything had collapsed. He tightened his grip on the small flash drive hidden inside his jacket, the one holding the only proof that could destroy the entire crew, the same crew he had once called family. Footsteps crunched on broken glass behind him. He froze. He knew the rhythm instantly slow, heavy, confident. Only one man walked like that, Marcus, the leader, the one who trained him, protected him, and now wanted him dead. Alex forced himself to breathe quietly. If Marcus found him, it was over. He pressed his back against the wall and slipped farther into the shadows, trying to calm the pounding in his ears. The memories came back sharp and fast. Marcus handing him his first gun. Marcus telling him loyalty meant everything. Marcus smiling like a proud father. And now, Marcus hunting him like prey. Alex edged forward, scanning the alley for escape routes. A fire escape ladder hung above, a little too high to reach without making noise. A narrow passage on the left led toward the old docks. He weighed both options, his mind racing, when his phone buzzed softly. He nearly jumped. A single message flashed on the cracked screen. They know where you are. Run. No name, no number, but he knew who it was: Lena, the only person still risking her life for him. For a second, hope flickered inside him, but it vanished when Marcus's deep voice rolled through the dark. "Alex, come out. You know this ends only one way." Alex swallowed hard. Marcus was closer now, maybe a few steps away. If he hesitated, he was dead. If he ran, he had a chance. He took one steadying breath and sprinted. The sudden motion sent trash scattering, metal clanging, and Marcus shouting. Alex dashed down the narrow passage, his shoes skidding on damp concrete. A bullet cracked past his shoulder, slamming into the wall. Another ricocheted near his feet. He didn't look back. The docks came into view, empty and stretching out into the black water. He spotted an abandoned warehouse with its side door half open, swaying in the breeze. He lunged inside and slammed the door shut, crouching behind a stack of wooden crates. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Through a gap in the boards, he saw Marcus entering the warehouse, gun raised, eyes scanning. Alex clutched the flash drive tighter. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, he would have to face Marcus. But not tonight. Not yet. Tonight was about surviving long enough to expose the truth. And for the first time, he felt the shift inside himself: fear turning into something sharper, something stronger, resolve. Ilira Vokshi had disappeared without a trace. By the time authorities began connecting the dots, she was already halfway across Scotland, moving through small towns where no one recognized her, and leaving behind a trail of rented cars, fake names, and temporary jobs. She thought she was safe, invisible to both law enforcement and the Albanian organization she had betrayed. Every move was calculated, every interaction measured. But she underestimated one crucial factor: the reach of an empire that had grown far beyond the borders of London. Arben's network may have been fractured, but the organization he had built was larger, smarter, and far more patient than she could imagine. Across Europe, encrypted communications between London and New York revealed her movements almost instantly. The leaders in the U.S. didn't need to confront her personally. They simply monitored, calculated, and waited. Ilira thought her digital trails were erased, but subtle signals in financial transactions, public registrations, and even hotel bookings betrayed her location. Every action she had taken left tiny fingerprints, invisible to her eyes, but clear to those trained to read them. The empire she had helped build was now observing her as a test of loyalty, a demonstration of power. Meanwhile, London continued to operate under the shadow of Arben's design. Katim Rasha, the new leader installed after Arben's disappearance, was methodical, cold, and efficient. Unlike Arben, he relied less on silence and more on structured discipline. Businesses continued to funnel money, containers continued to pass through Tilbury Port, and the city remained unaware of the force controlling the flow beneath their feet. The network rebuilt itself quietly, replacing Arben's visible presence with invisible threads that tied London, Europe, and the United States together. Ilira settled in a small coastal town, renting a modest flat under a false identity. She avoided banks, public transport, and any technology that could be tracked. For weeks, she felt a temporary relief, a fragile safety she had not known since joining Arben's network. But that relief was deceptive. Katim's operatives were patient, and the organization had a long memory. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed a pattern, a discrepancy, or an opportunity. Then, one evening, a routine check at Tilbury Port revealed a hidden ledger, tucked inside a container that had arrived from Eastern Europe. The ledger detailed years of financial transactions, shipments, and hidden accounts. The documents connected the UK operations directly to their American bosses. It was evidence of an empire that had grown silently, efficiently, and methodically. Investigators could finally see the scope of the operation, but they still did not know the location of Arben or the full extent of the network. Ilira sensed the shift immediately. She knew that ledger could be traced, and if it fell into the right hands, her past actions would be exposed. Panic replaced the temporary relief she had felt for weeks. She began moving again, staying one step ahead of a force that was both invisible and relentless. Every town she passed, every vehicle she rented, every interaction she made was a gamble. By the time authorities pieced together the connections between London and New York, Ilira had vanished again. Arben's whereabouts remained unknown. Some said he had fled to South America. Others whispered that he had been quietly eliminated by his own organization for disappearing. The truth was never confirmed. What was clear, however, was that the Albanian Mafia had grown stronger, more disciplined, and more global. London had become a testing ground, a foothold in Europe, and a warning that the empire did not collapse. It evolved. And Ilira, caught between fear and survival, would remain a ghost in a world that no longer belonged to her.